Hi everyone, thanks for joining. We've got a great webinar lined up for you all today, so let's jump right in and get started. Today we're going to talk about how you can extend your SharePoint processes beyond your firewall with a very cool feature called Nintex Live. Now before we get started, I've got a couple of quick housekeeping announcements to cover. All attendees are in listen-only mode, and since we've got lots to see, we won't be stopping for questions along the way, but please feel free to use the chat window to submit any questions that you may have, and we'll be sure to answer at the end. Just a quick little bit about Abel Solutions before we get started. For over 2 decades, clients have trusted us to help them reduce the cost, risk, and implementation time associated with solving their most critical business IT and collaboration challenges. We help companies achieve powerful business improvement through document management and workflow-enabled SharePoint solutions, unique applications, technology planning and support, and a wide array of complementary IT services. Among our growing list of industry-specific solutions, we offer pre-built collaboration frameworks that shrink implementation time and cost. Now, as a long-standing Microsoft Gold partner focused on improving business productivity, Abel Solutions now also offers services that help you achieve better IT cost control. And in addition to our partnership with Microsoft, we also are Nintex's go-to partner in the Southeast and longest-serving partner in the region, delivering Nintex software, services, and training since 2008. Now, who am I? My name is Nicole Presby. I'm a senior SharePoint consultant here at Abel Solutions, where Nintex is one of my primary areas of expertise. As I mentioned, Abel Solutions is one of Nintex's premier partners, and we've had a very close relationship for many, many years. Because of the work I've been able to do here at Abel, I'm also a virtual technical evangelist for Nintex, which is essentially equivalent to Microsoft's MVP program. It basically means that I'm active in community events, I handle the pre-sales demos and discussions for Abel Solutions, and I lead the charge on our Nintex consulting and training service offerings. My blog is listed there. Feel free to check it out. I typically post tips and tricks to help you on your SharePoint and Nintex journey. Now, for more information about Abel Solutions or Nintex, you can check out the websites listed at the bottom of this slide, follow us on Twitter, or contact us directly, and I'll be sure to share some contact information with you at the end of the webinar. Now, on to the agenda for today. We'll start with just a few slides to cover a quick overview of the Nintex product suite for those who may not be familiar. Then we'll talk a little bit about the Nintex feature that makes external forms possible, which is Nintex Live. Once we have a good understanding of the Nintex Live framework, we'll take a look at a couple of example forms which are available to the public, as well as the magic that makes those happen behind the scenes. After that, I've got a couple of best practices and considerations that I want to be sure to share with you. And then, of course, we'll wrap up with a bit of Q&A. Now, for those of you who may be newer to Nintex, I just wanted to give a quick overview of everything that the Nintex workflow platform currently has to offer. First, we have Nintex Workflow, which allows you to build out and automate your business processes quickly and easily. Nintex Forms provides a user interface to kick off those workflows with powerful business logic built right into the data capture stage. Nintex Mobile extends workflows and forms so that users can stay connected no matter where they are and take their processes on the go. Nintex Hawkeye Workflow Analytics provides the ability to get a 30,000-foot view of every inch of every workflow in your organization. Nintex App Studio extends on the Nintex mobile capabilities by allowing you to easily create custom, targeted, and powerful mobile process applications. Nintex Document Generation simplifies and automates document generation using dynamic process data. One quick side note, we recently did a webinar that was a deep dive into the DocGen action for Nintex for Office 365, so you can go watch it on our Abel Solutions YouTube channel, and while you're there, be sure to subscribe so that you can get updates as we post new videos. And then finally, we've got several Nintex connectors, which allow for seamless integration to other cloud-based applications that your organization may be using, essentially allowing you to create workflows without boundaries. All right, now let's jump in and get started with Nintex Live. First up, let's talk about exactly what Nintex Live is. Nintex Live is a hosted service on the Microsoft Windows Azure Cloud Platform that securely extends the integrated capabilities of Nintex Workflow, Nintex Forms for SharePoint, and Nintex Mobile. Now the diagram up here shows the architecture of Nintex Live for SharePoint environments and displays the relationships and transient data flow between the Nintex Live or the Windows Azure infrastructure for Nintex workflows and Nintex forms, and the Nintex Live framework that enables connectivity to Nintex Live. One important thing to note is that Nintex Live is a data routing solution only. It is not a repository or a system of records. So what that means is that any data which is temporarily held by Nintex Live is going to be removed after the dependent processes are finished. Now, as you can see on the diagram, Nintex Live can be enabled for Nintex Workflow and Nintex Forms and offers different capabilities for each. Let's take a quick look at what Nintex Live means for Nintex Workflow, and then we're going to focus on the Forms piece for the rest of our topic for today. Once Nintex Live is enabled for Nintex Workflow, you have access to the Nintex Live catalog from the main ribbon of the Nintex Workflow Designer. The catalog lists the available Nintex Live services that can be added to the Nintex Workflow Actions toolbox. So this allows you to build more powerful workflows by extending your action toolbox to include direct connectors to third-party service providers such as Box, Dropbox, Office 365, DocuSign, Dynamics CRM, Salesforce, and many, many more. Now from a Nintex Forms perspective, Nintex Live allows you to publish and host forms from within Nintex Live, which can then be submitted by anonymous, secure desktop, or mobile device end users safely outside of your company's firewall. Essentially, this form hosting service allows you to extend your forms beyond your intranet or your extranet, making them available to internet users and accessible from anywhere without relying on the configuration of the SharePoint infrastructure. Individuals outside of your corporate network are able to easily access the form from any device, of course, as specified by the Forms Designer, which is one of the things we'll see now in our demo. All right, so the scenario that we're going to be looking at today is centered around the process of hosting an event, such as a training class that includes a registration form at the beginning of the process and then a follow-up survey form once the class is complete. All right, so with that, let's jump on over into our demo. So let's start by seeing what the form experience is like for the end user, and then we'll work our way backwards to see how we made it happen. So what we see here is that we have a custom form with our custom corporate branding applied, such as our corporate color scheme, our custom form label and logos, etc. Now this is all very typical to what we're used to seeing with our Nintex forms, and with Nintex Live, we're able to make those custom branded forms available from outside of our SharePoint environment. So in this scenario, there are a variety of paths that could have brought me to this externally available form. Since this is a registration form for an event which is open to the public, a direct link could be included in an email blast. We could post the link to social media, or we could even add a button to a public website. In any case, when an intranet user clicks the link, this form loads into their browser. And we'll see in a minute that we've also created a version of the form which has been optimized for mobile devices. Now, as for the details of the form, this one's pretty straightforward. It's set to capture basic information. So for example, we offer an Nintex training for on-prem and Office 365, and we happen to have upcoming classes on the schedule for both. So the first thing we need to know is which class this person intends to attend. So if we select one of those, and then we also need to know whether they're planning to attend in person or remotely. And then, of course, their name, contact information, and a little bit of payment details. Now, when this form is submitted, an item is actually going to be added into our SharePoint list, and an Nintex workflow can be set to kick off to send registration confirmation email back to the attendee, and maybe even a series of tasks to be handled internally to prepare for this attendee in the specified class. So essentially what we've done is provided the opportunity to capture data from external users directly and securely into our SharePoint database, which we can then pick up and run with from there as if it were coming from one of our internal SharePoint users. Now let me drag my little smartphone over here. So as I mentioned, we've also created an optimized version of this form for mobile users, and here's what that looks like. As you can see, we're capturing all of the same information, and because the form integrates well with my smartphone, it's going to behave as we're used to all of these features behaving on my native device. So we're capturing all the same information, but it's organized in a way that presents that annoying horizontal scrolling on a small screen, such as my iPhone. So now let's take a look under the covers. Let me get this guy out of the way. Get him back over here. All right. So now let's take a look under the covers and see how we made all this magic happen. So essentially what we've got here is a SharePoint 2016 on-prem environment with a list called attendee tracking. And this is where our custom Nintex form lives. So when we open up the Nintex Forms Designer for this list, the first thing that we might notice is that this does not exactly match what we just saw in our live version of the form. So for example, we see the same banner image at the top, our same custom color scheme and so on, but there are several additional buttons here as well as a section at the bottom that's labeled for admin use. Now, you may be familiar with the rules engine that comes with Nintex Forms and allows you to specify conditions. Let me open that guy up. It's going to allow us to specify conditions under which form elements show, hide, enable, disable, or even we can specify conditional data requirements and validation. One of the common properties that we have access to when we're building out our conditions for these rules is to set specific rules to fire based on whether or not someone's accessing the Nintex Live or the external version of the form. So in this case, that's just what we've done here. We've got rules on the save and the cancel buttons as well as this admin panel that make it so that those elements only appear if the user is accessing this form and is logged into SharePoint while they're accessing it. So in other words, those elements are hidden if a user, if an external user is interacting with the form through Nintex Live. So this allows us to be able to add information and store additional details about this attendee in our SharePoint list even after the initial registration has been captured. Now again, if you're familiar with Nintex Forms, then you're probably familiar with the concept of device layouts. So these allow you to create optimized versions of a form for users who may not be sitting in front of a computer and instead accessing the form through alternate devices. In this case, we're assuming that it's highly possible for users to get the link to our registration form while on their phone. So we've been sure to create a layout to ensure that there's a pleasant user experience associated with that particular scenario, which is just what we saw. And again, the primary focus is to avoid all of that horizontal annoying scrolling. Okay. So those are some of the standard Nintex Forms features that we're leveraging to create our custom form experience. But now how do we make that available to users outside of our firewall? That's the cool part that we really want to see today. So in the ribbon, there's an option for external form settings. And I want to point out that Nintex Live is available for SharePoint and Nintex on-prem 2013 and 2010, but it's going to appear in the ribbon as live settings instead of external form settings. So keep that in mind if you're not on SharePoint 2016 just yet. Now, when we first open the external settings dialog for a form, the only thing that's going to appear is the option to publish to Nintex external platform. Then when you select that checkbox, you're going to be presented with several additional configuration options. So we'll run through those now. First of all, you have the option to create a short URL. So this is going to be great if you'll be posting to social media, especially something like Twitter where you're restricted to that small amount of characters for your post. Next, kind of the other big component, the big decision that you need to make is specifying who should be allowed to access the form. And we have two options here. We can allow anonymous users or we can specify external users by email address. So the default setting is actually to provide the email address of the users who are allowed to view and submit the form. So the way that this works is users are then required to authenticate with an authentication provider such as Windows Live, Google, or Facebook. And then by authenticating with that provider, the provider supplies Nintex Live with the user's registered email address, and then that email address will be matched up to the email address stored in the form configuration here to give access to the user. Now, when this option is selected, you also have the option to specify the number of times that a single user can submit the form with the submissions per user setting. Of course, since the topic of our webinar today is publishing anonymous forms with Nintex Live, what you saw with this particular example is that we've actually selected the option to allow anonymous users to view and submit the form instead. So this setting is the setting, this is not the default setting, it's going to be disabled by default, but we can turn that on. And then when we select this option, instead of specifying maximum submissions per user, because we actually aren't going to know who the users are, instead we have the option to specify the total number of times that the form can be submitted with this maximum submissions setting. So this is going to help kind of safeguard your list, right? Because we don't want all of a sudden this link gets tweeted out and it becomes viral and all of a sudden we get 10,000 entries that come into our SharePoint list and blow up our site, right? So we want to be cautious of that. So there's another option underneath our maximum submissions where we can specify a form expiry date. So this is going to be the date when the form can no longer be viewed or submitted. So in our example of our training class scenario where this is a registration form, we could set this to our registration deadline date. So let's say we don't accept registration, we require that registration happens a week before the actual date. So we could actually set this form to expire on that date if we need to. And then lastly, you have the option to specify the default time zone, which is the time zone that the form is going to default to when it's accessed through the Nintex external platform. So any date and time that's entered using the external form is going to be stored according to that time zone unless it's overridden by the user who's filling out the form. And then the last thing that we see here, the two sections at the bottom, or where you can customize what the user is going to see if they cancel the form submission or if they submit it successfully. So you can see here that we've added our custom banner and our logo so that it coordinates with kind of our overall look and feel. And then we can even customize the details and the appearance of the message as well. So if we want to have a customized message here, and then we have all of our same kind of rich text options for what we want to add here in each of these messages. So now let's take a look at another form in our example scenario. So once we've captured, let me jump right on over here. So once we've captured the registration information and each person has actually attended the class, we like to capture feedback from each attendee so that we can learn how we might improve our offering for future events. So here we see another form which has a slightly different look and is set to capture all that feedback that's important for our scenario. So, and you can see here we've also got panels for general feedback as well as more specific information about the trainer and the course, so on and so forth. So now let's take just a quick peek at the forms designer for this form and we'll see how we made this form. So here once again we see that we've created a version of this form that's optimized for our desktop users as well as our smartphone users. So we want to be sure that you could imagine that if we give this form with kind of all of these radio buttons out to the right and a user is trying to access that from a very skinny smartphone and they're having to scroll a ton of times to complete that, it's going to be a really annoying experience. So again, we're sure that we create our smartphone layout where we can optimize it for those smartphone users and give them a pleasant experience as they're submitting their feedback to us. And then once again, let's just jump right on into our external form settings. So most of our settings are actually the same as what we saw with our registration form, but in this case, the URL would be emailed directly to attendees. So the difference here is actually how our users are gaining access to this form on the external platform. So the registration form, while we might send it out in an email blast, post it on our website, send it over on social media, this one is more specified and we want to email this directly to those specific attendees who attended this class rather than post it publicly to our website or on social media. So we could actually choose to specify only those users to be able to access the form. But in this case, since we're not posting this link publicly to this form, a simpler approach is going to be to allow anonymous access just like we did with the registration form. And what that does is that when each attendee gets their email and then they click on the link that's in the email, it's going to give them a simpler user experience because they don't have to worry about authenticating into the form. They can just jump right in and get started. All right. So we just took a really quick kind of deep dive into a couple of specific use cases, but there are tons of other scenarios where this functionality can come in super handy. So here we see a couple of those other scenarios. So from onboarding to client relations, incident tracking to sales and order processing, this ability to create, publish, and manage an external form extends your business processes beyond your corporate firewall and can be super powerful. Now, the best part is if you already have Nintex forms for SharePoint on-prem, you've got this power at your fingertips, and it may just be a matter of connecting with your kind of IT services or your SharePoint admins to kind of open up that functionality for you. All right, so before we wrap up, I just thought I'd reiterate a few best practices and things to consider when you start building your own external forms with Nintex. First of all, when you include images in your external forms, like the logos and the banners that we saw today, they're going to need to be stored and referenced in a place which is publicly accessible, such as your external website is probably going to be the easiest place. Otherwise, they'll be presented with that really unappealing X where the image should appear. So if you even though this form is going to be hosted in SharePoint, if you're including images to be included on this form and then posting it and making it consumable by external users, you want to make sure that all of those images are in a place where those users can access. If you store them into SharePoint, they won't be able to access those images and it won't look very good. Testing. So testing is always an important part of any project where SharePoint or Nintex are involved, and external forms are no exception. The key thing that we want to focus on here has to do with the fact that you don't know the exact conditions under which each user is going to access your form. So it's really important to test from multiple devices and browsers. Now, if you can get a few teammates to test your form from their device and browser combination, then that's going to hit a few more combinations that you might not otherwise, and that would give you kind of a more well-rounded testing scenario. But if you're the only person who's building out this form and you need to handle all the testing on your own, remember that most browsers will automatically log you into the form if it lives in a location on SharePoint where you're currently or have recently logged in. So what that means is that if I have access, obviously I have access to the SharePoint environment where I'm creating this Nintex form and publishing it for external use. But if I would need to test it now, as an external user, the easiest thing to do is going to go ahead and log in as one of the incognito or the private browser sessions so that you don't get a false positive testing result. And what I mean by that is that even if it doesn't look like it, your browser kind of stores most likely your SharePoint login credentials. So when you hit the form, it might, for example, the images we were just talking about, if you've accidentally forgotten and stored them in SharePoint and you test out your external form, but the browser's logging you into SharePoint behind the scenes, you won't know that that image isn't going to appear well for your external users. So take advantage of those incognito or those private browser sessions to help you with testing these scenarios. All right, so with that, we've reached the end of our content for today. So please feel free to contact us if you think you've got access to this functionality and you need help getting started with these external form needs, or if you've got other SharePoint or Nintex projects that we can help you with, definitely feel free to use the contact information on the bottom of that slide. And then with that, let's jump over and see, I think we've got a few questions that have come through in the question pane, so we'll take a few questions. All right, so first one here, is Nintex Live a separate purchase? No, so Nintex Live is actually, it's not going to be an additional purchase. If you've got Nintex installed, then it's really just simply a matter of enabling that Nintex Live or the external functionality for workflow, forms, or both. And that's done primarily through central admin. So you may, if you don't have access to your SharePoint central admin space, then you may need to get someone else in your organization involved. Is there a limit to how many forms I can create with Nintex Live? No, not that I've ever run into. Can any device be used to access the form? So yes, yeah, you can choose to create those optimized layouts that we saw for all your various different devices as you need to. Okay, there's one here asking about security. So is Nintex Live secure when we're basically giving access to our kind of private SharePoint space externally? Yeah, so all communication points to to Nintex Live use the SSL to prevent that data screening or the eavesdropping and tampering. Now there's a white paper out there that goes into more detail, so if you're interested, I would just if you do a Google search for Nintex Live security, it should be the first PDF that pops up in those results. So if you're concerned about that at all and you want more information on that, there's definitely that document that'll go into lots of detail about that. Do we need Nintex Live? Okay, so do we need Nintex Live if our SharePoint site is accessible to the public internet? No. So if you've got your SharePoint site already accessible to the public internet, then you can just simply publish your Nintex form as normal. So Nintex Forms is still going to allow you to create kind of that custom form experience. You just don't actually need to leverage this Nintex Live capability to make it available for the internet users if your whole SharePoint site is already accessible to the public internet. And then lastly, is this being recorded? Yes, we are recording this webinar. We'll be emailing the recording, and then it'll also be available up on our YouTube channel, probably in a few days, I would guess. So it'll be available for you there. All right, and I think if there are no other questions that are coming in, then that brings us to the end of our webinar. I hope that y'all found that interesting. I think this is kind of a more specific use case, but this Nintex Live framework that you get when you have Nintex, for your on-prem SharePoint environment is really, really powerful, and it's already there ready for you to use. So I think once you know that it's there, you might start to think of some really cool ways that you can actually leverage it. So with that, I thank you, and I give you back 3 minutes in your day, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thanks so much.